Alright, I am back with another build, and today we are going to do the first of my Halloween builds for 2024. Last year in 2023, when the channel was a bit newer, I did do some October builds, which is what I called them, that have kind of had a spooky theming to them based on some classic horror tropes and such like that. You know, we had a slasher build, a bit like Michael Myers and such like that, for example. And this year, the origin characters are dressing up for Halloween. I'm going to be making origin builds for all of the characters that are based on classic characters from horror media. And I mean classic, because today we're turning Gale into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or as I've titled the video, Dr. Dekarios and Mr. Downie. I didn't know what to replace Mr. Hyde with, and then someone in my Discord suggested Mr. Downie as a reference to the voice actor, and I'm like, you know what? I like that. So here we are, we're turning Gale into Jekyll and Hyde, and this is a really, really fun kind of build series because it's going to allow me to kind of mess with the characters in ways that I wouldn't normally do naturally. Because usually when I make origin builds, I try to stick to the kind of base class and kind of make a build that makes sense for the origin character themselves. But for Halloween, they're dressing up as people who are completely different than themselves and maybe at the very least have some thematic connection to them in some shape or form. And so I do get to play around a little bit more. So you're going to be seeing some origin character builds that definitely differ from the norm of what you would expect from these characters, and I think this build is going to be pretty damn awesome. We are going to be doing a wizard with this build, but I think the twist that is placed on it will make a lot of sense for the character that we're trying to emulate, and make a lot of sense for Gale. So for those of you that don't know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a very, very classic piece of horror literature, where unfortunately now the twist is kind of just mainstream. You pretty much know the story before you even read it, but it's about a man who uses an alchemical concoction to allow himself to take on basically a disguise, and this is Dr. Jekyll, by the way, and the disguise is Mr. Hyde, and basically while he is Mr. Hyde, he basically just gets to indulge in whatever dark urges fulfill his fancy. So if you didn't want to build this with Gale, building this with the dark urge would make a lot of sense. And so the idea of this build is to basically have two sides of the same character, one who is a very smart and well-respected wizard, and the other who is a baseless, violent individual. And the thing people kind of get wrong about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is that the pop culture thing about it was that Hyde was this like monstrous transformation, almost like a Diet Incredible Hulk, but it's not really true. It is literally just Jekyll taking on a different form, which allows his more base personality to come through. And I think that's a really interesting take on the character. So while I will be kind of throwing in kind of the pop culture thing here so that the build is more recognizable for a general audience, just know that I did take the actual classic literature version into account when making this build. And I think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde works well for Gale, because while Gale is obviously an upstanding wizard, master of his craft, and would be well respected amongst, you know, people in Waterdeep and such like that, it is very obvious that he has these base desires for power, and even to some extent, not violence, but definitely, you know, has the capacity to just gain power for power's sake, hence the fact that he's got a bomb in his chest, and also, you know, the fact that he would eventually become a god if he went down that path. You know, there's definitely, like, a bit of Jekyll and Hyde in there somewhere, just in Gale's kind of character, at least in my opinion. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the build. Now, mechanically, this build is going to be very interesting, because now this is going to be the start of when I start using certain mods in my base rotation. Or base rotation, I should say, base kind of, like, kit, because now that we have mods on consoles, mods that are available to everyone, including ones that are quite balanced and do just expand for base content of the game in a meaningful way, you are going to be starting to see some spells, classes and subclasses that aren't part of the vanilla game. But I will be personally vetting all of these mods myself to make sure that they still work well for build making and are fun to use. There are some class and subclass mods that, in my opinion, are just too overpowered and don't make the actual build making process very fun. But depending on what people want to see, you'll have to let me know, but I am going to be keeping it to mods that are available to all platforms so that everyone can make these builds. And for this build, everyone can make it, despite the fact that it is going to have some modded elements. So let's get into it. We're going to be kicking things off as a wizard, but if you wanted to kick things off as our multi-class, that also makes sense. In fact, you can take the levels for this build in pretty much any order you like. I would just make sure that you get 2 levels of wizard fairly early on. But for Wizard, we are going to gain access to a few things. Namely, we are going to be getting some cantrips, and I'm going to be choosing to kind of flavor spells as alchemical potions that we are just kind of creating. So we're going to be going for things like acid and poison damage, and also kind of spells that will have some kind of funky effects that can be flavored as us just pulling out a bottle and splashing it on our opponent. In a way, you'll see what I mean as we get through the build. I think you'll agree that when this build is done, it all kind of makes sense and is going to feel very flavorful to play. So for our cantrips, we're going to be going with Acid Splash to allow us to do a 1d6 of acid damage, as well as Poison Spray to allow us to do a 1d12 of poison damage. And finally, Green Flame Blade. The brand new spell mod that's just been added to consoles and PC called Mr Spells adds a ton of 5e spells to the game. It's a bit like the 5e spells mod from Nexus, although these ones are a bit more vetted for console use, as well as the fact that it also adds spells from like Tasha's and some Unearthed Arcana spells as well. So you may see some things that you don't quite recognize in here, but it is going to allow all of my spellcasting builds to just feel way more interesting and effective. And Green Flame Blade is awesome. We are going to be using a melee weapon with this build, so being able to like put a strange alchemical concoction on it that coats it in this ethereal green flame and then smack them with fire damage is going to feel really, really fun. So I wanted to put Green Flame Blade on this build, but of course we're going to gain access to a bunch of cantrips that I'll get into a bit more later. Next up, for our spells, we have a ton more options now thanks to the Mistress Spells mod. First up, Tasha's Caustic Brew, allowing us to summon a stream of acid that corrodes enemies for 3d4 acid damage. Overall, we just make an acid potion and throw it at our enemies. Number 2, Ray of Sickness. This is a base game spell that does 2d8 poison damage and can possibly poison the target. Poison means that the affected creature suffers disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. Next up, Shield. This is just a base level spell that I want to take all the time. It's one of the best level 1 spells in the game, and it is a reaction based spell, which will be having some synergy with our multi-class. Next up, Grease. I mean, this one's pretty obvious. We basically just conjure a bottle of grease and throw it on the ground. Again, we can just say that we have a lot of bottles of grease on us. So yeah, and of course, creatures that are on the grease that can potentially fall prone, as well as the fact that they can also potentially, it can also be lit on fire. Next up, we also have access to Chromatic Ore, which lets us do all sorts of things with different types of elemental damage, but it also creates surfaces, and you can create like acid surfaces and such like that with this, so it kind of does work for like an unstable chemical concoction. And then finally, Disguise Self. I mean, that kind of just makes sense for a build like this, doesn't it? Once we do things as Mr. Hyde and return back to Dr. Jekyll, we definitely want to make sure that we can escape the scene pretty easily, so Disguise Self is going to help us with that. Next up, for our ability schools, this is going to look a bit weird, I will admit, but trust me, it will make sense. Strength is at 8. We are going to be using an item and also an elixir, because we could make them really easily, to bump this up. Dexterity is going to be at 16 for our armor class. Constitution is at 13, a first for the channel if I remember correctly. We are going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, and we'll have the ability to use equipment or an ability score improvement to bump this up even further if we so desire. Intelligence is at 16, we are a wizard, this is going to be our main spellcasting modifier. And I have charisma and wisdom at this level. I would actually recommend doing this. I kind of made a mistake when I initially made this build and when I was doing my testing. You're going to want Wisdom at 12 and Charisma at 10. Wisdom being at 12 is going to help with a skill proficiency that we're going to be getting in a minute, as well as Charisma at 10 is just better than having nothing. As for our skill proficiencies, Gale is a Sage, meaning that he is going to have the Arcana and History background proficiencies, as well as you're going to want to choose 2 from the Wizard list. I'm going to recommend that one of the ones you pick up is Medicine. This works with our Wisdom, that's why we need it at 12. Medicine is going to synergize with an ability that we're going to be getting later, and of course Dr. Jekyll makes a ton of alchemical creations and potions and concoctions, and we want to kind of reflect that in our skill set. As for your other skill proficiency with Wizard, take whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Arcana and History we already have, so it's entirely up to you. Investigation seems fine. And finally, as a human, which Gale is, we do get to choose one extra skill proficiency that we want. I've gone with Deception for obvious reasons. Next up at Wizard level 2, we're going to get to pick our subclass, and of course, for a guy who creates alchemical concoctions like potions, grenades, and elixirs, we're obviously going to be going with Transmutation Wizard. Haven't used this one properly in a while. It used to be one of my favourite Wizard subclasses, and now we're finally bringing it back for probably the most thematic reason possible. With this, we're going to be able to get a bit of a discount on scribing spell scrolls that use the Transmutation class, as well as being able to grab Experimental Alchemy, meaning that we can brew 2 alchemical solutions instead of 1 when combining extracts if we succeed a DC 15 medicine check. That's why we wanted that 12 in Wizard. system and medicine proficiency. This is going to allow us to make it so that we get a bit more out of our resources, because the whole point of this build is in order to make our alchemical concoctions that allow us to do all these special things, we are going to want to be picking up as many alchemical ingredients as possible, buying them from shops, finding them out in the overworld, that sort of thing. And it is a fun side quest. It messes with the alchemy system, which most people wouldn't normally do, but it is a fun system to use, and if used properly, can give you a lot of stuff that is very powerful that can really augment your playthrough. The combat footage will show that quite clearly. But yes, Transmutation is going to be super fun for this build, so I'm really happy to pick it up here. Next up, we do get to pick up some extra level 1 spells. I'm going to be going with Colour Spray to literally just get a bottle of something and splash it on our enemies to potentially blind them, which can be a fun little spell. And then it's kind of up to you for what else you want to take. I took Longstrider because it's going to work for us no matter what and just give us a bit more movement speed, which is something we're definitely going to want for this build. And feel free to kind of slot in the spells however you like. Now, again, I did say that you can kind of take the levels of this build in any order to kind of just get what you want at what point, but like I say, now that we've got those 2 levels of Wizard out of the way, you're pretty much set to take any sort of build progression you want. I'm just going to be showing the levels in order of the classes, but feel free to experiment and mix and match how you want to take these levels. So next up, with Wizard level 3, we're going to gain access to level 2 spells. As you can see, we have a lot of options. The first one I'm going to be taking is a vanilla spell, Melf's Acid Arrow. Again, just a big acid concoction that we get to chuck at our enemies. Shoot a green arrow that covers the target on the ground with acid. Deals 4d4 acid damage, and immediately deal another 2d4 acid damage at the end of the target's turn. So it is just a big chunk of damage and then a bit of passive damage after. Always great to have. And as for your other spell, you can kind of take whatever you like here. I do like from our now expanded spell list, thanks to the Tasha spells, there are a couple that I like, namely Healing Elixir, which is a spell that's going to allow us to just make a potion of healing whenever we want. It costs an action and a bonus action in the level 2 spell slot, but it is just a guaranteed way to get another healing potion if you aren't quite able to get those alchemical ingredients that you want. And of course, I'm gonna take the spell that just makes a potion for us in a build that uses Transmutation Wizard. Like, come on. Oddly enough, it's a conjuration spell, but I can see the case being made for it being that anyway. And of course, we do have a few more fun options that I'll be getting to as the levels go on. So yeah, feel free to kind of mix and match, like I say. Is Melf's Acid Arrow better than Tasha's Caustic Brew? Probably. Next up, at Wizard level 4, we get to choose another cantrip. And of course, when making alchemical things, we need to be able to heat up our flasks in order to be able to make the proper common combinations. It's basic chemistry, even though we're doing alchemy. It's kind of the same thing, right? Just one's a bit more fantasy than the other. So we're going to be grabbing Create Bonfire. Allows us to create a bonfire that burns creatures within 2 meters, dealing 1d8 fire damage. It does require our concentration, unfortunately, but I did feel like Create Bonfire made a bit more sense than Firebolt in this case. But if you would rather take Firebolt, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not your mum. Anyways, next up for our level 2 spells, we do get to take a couple more, and I do think this is going to work quite nicely. We're going to get access to Pyrotechnics, which allows us to create fireworks, so again, making something with alchemy or chemistry or whatever, and allows that you can choose the effect. It can either blind creatures or create smoke that heavily obscures. So you're either getting the blindness spell or the darkness spell, which I think is very, very cool. It only lasts for 1 turn, unfortunately, and the blindness aspect does require a con save, a bit like the actual blindness spell itself, but I think it's just too cool not to use for this build, so I want to pick it up. We're also going to be picking up, and this has some kind of reference to the classic story, we're going to be picking up Jim's Glowing Coin. Throw a coin to distract enemies. They have a disadvantage on wisdom ability checks and suffer a -3 penalty to initiative rolls. You can remain hidden while casting the spell, and you can cast the spell while you are silenced. Dr. Jekyll, in the book, is a very rich and well-respected person. He's, like I say, a doctor. He is Dr. Jekyll. And as such, he would be quite wealthy. And I feel like the idea of him getting this sudden, like, he's about to transform into Mr. Hyde, kind of unexpectedly, which does happen in the novel, and he needs to, like, distract people, just chucking a coin, making a noise, forcing people to go investigate, and then being able to slip away before being seen, does actually make a lot of sense for this build. So I kind of wanted to include it here because it is such a fun spell. But I will go over a couple of other options here that I like. We do gain access to, where is it? I did see it. Silvery Barbs, which is a very overpowered spell, but would absolutely work for this build. There are a couple of others. There's like Jim's Magic Missile, if you wanted a slightly better version of Magic Missile. Well, better, I say it's a bit of a side grade, really. Mental Barrier, Mind Spike. There's so many fun spells here, but I'm just going to, instead of trying to list all of these extra spells that we now have, just go with the two that I suggested for now. I would say let's change you for you, and yeah, I'd say that's pretty good for now. Next up, for our feats. Now, obviously, we're a Transmutation wizard. We can make grenades. We can make vials of things that we can throw, like Alchemist Fire and the Acid Vial. So we're going to be doing a lot of throwing with this build, so we are going to grab Tavern Brawler. Tavern Brawler is going to allow us to bump up our Strength or Constitution by 1. We're going to be bumping up our Constitution to round out that awkward ability score. And whenever we make an unarmed attack, use an improvised weapon, or throw something, your Strength modifier is added twice to the damage and attack rolls. Again, even though our Strength is at 8, between the fact that we can make elixirs of Cloud Giant Strength if we want to, or Hail Giant Strength in the other game, and we're also going to be using a piece of equipment, that being the Club of Hail Giant Strength, to basically constantly have at least 19 strength, means that this is going to be very, very effective. And you may think that the extra damage from throwing bottles isn't really worth it. Trust me, the amount of damage output you get on the thrown attacks from this is definitely worth it. It increases the DPS of this build. Well, I said DPS, you know the exact term. It does do its job really, really well. And we will have the opportunity to get more Constitution later if you so choose. At Wizard level 5, we're going to gain access to level 3 spells. And by Jove, there's a lot to choose from. Obviously, we can also go back to any of the level 1 or 2 spells, but we do have a lot of extra options for level 3 spells as well, thanks to Tasha's. I don't think I really would take any of these just off the top of my head. I did kind of stick with basic level spells for now, because I'm going to want Blink and Counterspell. Blink and Counterspell. Counterspell is a reaction, so it's always good to have, and Blink is one of the very few spells that can work with a Barbarian's Rage, because obviously we're taking Barbarian. There's no point in skirting around it anymore, so we're going to be picking up these two spells because they will work with our Rage. Next up, for our we can just prepare spells here, I would say definitely want Counterspell because reaction-based spells still work in Rage for some reason, and Blink because yes, that also does work in Rage, and it can be a bit of extra defensive utility with our squishy wizard hit die. Next up, at Wizard level 6, we're going to gain access to Transmutation Stone. Now, you don't actually need to take level 6 of Wizard here. This just gives us an extra spell slot, which I quite like to have. Transmutation Stone, which can be quite useful, as well as a couple of more level 3 spells. But you don't actually need to take the 6th level of Wizard here. You could throw in a 1 level dip of another class, or put 7 levels into Barbarian. It's entirely up to you. Pick and choose here, but I went for a 6-6 split because I did kind of like getting the extra level 6 features from Transmutation Wizard. So we do get to pick some more level 3 spells here, and there are quite a few cool options here. I believe I looked at Flame Arrows, could be another good one. I would actually say that this build pairs really well if you have an archer character in the party, because a lot of the things you can make with alchemy are range, like the elemental arrows, so that could be really useful, and Flame Arrow could also bolster that. So I would personally recommend pairing this with an archer character. Will I have an archer character as part of these October builds? I don't know yet. Maybe we'll see. But yeah, there's a ton of different things you can pick up here. Psionic Blast, definitely going to use that in a future video. Summon Lesser Demons, again, and Summon Shadow Spawn could also be fun. Thunder Step, if you need to get in and out of melee range. I would actually say Misty Step is probably going to be really, really good for this build, because we are going to be working effectively at both melee and ranged, and we're going to want to be able to get in and out of melee and ranged combat basically as freely as we'd like. And you may be thinking, well, how are you going to reflavor Misty Step as a, you know, alchemic, like, brew or whatever? I'll be honest, I'm not. This is just a very powerful utility spell that just helps the build out. I'm sure somebody in the comments will think of something. And then finally, I would say Stinking Cloud is obviously another great choice here for an alchemical kind of spell, basically allowing us to create a cloud of gas so nauseating that it prevents creatures from taking actions. So again, big, like, smoke bomb attack or something, in which case things like darkness and fog could also work, but we don't have Devil Sight or anything on this build, so that's kind of a if you want it situation. And I would say, let's, I don't know what to pick here. Pick your favorites, I don't care. Right, now that we've done 6 levels of Wizard, we are going to jump over to the, where is it? The Barbarian levels. And yes, I will just quickly point out, you do see a few extra classes here. We'll be exploring those a bit later. Not in this build, or any build videos just yet, but we shall see. As for our Barbarian levels, we are going to get Rage at level 1. This is Mr. Hyde coming out to play, or in our case, Mr. Downie. Rage is going to allow us to gain resistance to physical damage, as well as dealing an extra 2 extra damage with melee and improvised weapons and throwing, so it is more throwing damage for when we toss our grenades at people. We're also going to get access to unarmored defense. While we're not wearing armor, you add your constitution modifier to your armor class. I am wearing light armor here, but this is purely for the fashion. I am going to have a bit more of a proper power building option in a bit, but obviously I wanted to get the top hat look because it's kind of iconic for Jekyll and Hyde. At Barbarian level 2, you're going to gain access to Danger Sense, allowing you to have advantage on dexterity saving throws against traps, spells, and surfaces. Amazing! As well as Reckless Attack. Until your next turn, you have advantage on attack rolls, but enemies also have advantage to attack you. Two amazing features here, no notes. Next up, at Barbarian level 3, we get to choose our subclass. Now, you do have a few options here. Wild Magic would obviously make sense if you wanted to go for like the chaotic nature of using the alchemical solutions on yourself, causing weird effects. That works amazingly. Wild Heart, if you just want the resistance, or if you want to maybe go to level 6, get the Chimp thing that allows you to throw camp supplies as well. That could also work, but I did go with Berserker for this build, as it is going to allow us to throw as a bonus action and make a bonus action extra attack as well as Frenzy just being a slightly better version of Rage anyway. So yeah, this is going to really help us out here with our build. This means we can throw 3 of our grenades, whatever we're doing, up to 3 times per turn, which is really nice. Although our bonus action is going to be taken up by actually using potions ourselves, because we are going to be using potions to kind of keep ourselves in the fight for longer. So this build is a bit bonus action heavy, but when you have the option to do 3 throwing attacks, you want to do 3 throwing attacks. And again, 3 melee attacks is not going to be exactly a bad thing either. This build loves the extra kind of DPS it can put out. Next up, at Barbarian level 4, we get to choose another feat. Now, you have a lot of options here, but I would personally just kind of stick with the basics and go with an ability score improvement. Now, you have a choice as to what you want to do here. Obviously, I kind of went with bumping up intelligence to give all of our spells a bit of extra oomph, but there is reasons to go for pretty much any stat here, I would say, aside from strength. Dexterity for more armor class, constitution for more HP and armor class, because we do have a clothing option for this build if you want to go for, you know, the clothing option there for that Barbarian unarmored defense. Wisdom for better medicine checks for making our chemical solutions. It's entirely up to you. In my testing, I went for 18 intelligence in order to get a better usage out of our spells, and I do think that is probably a pretty strong way to go. But obviously, if you feel comfortable with using the spells with 16 intelligence, then that does open up a lot of options for you. So choose your favorite there. Next up at Barbarian level 5, we're going to get fast movement, which is going to be great for us. Again, we want that movement speed, as well as extra attack, so now we can bonk even more. And finally, at Barbarian level 6, we are going to get an extra charge of Rage, which I think is nice to have, but again, maybe you feel like that this 6th level of Barbarian isn't necessary, in which case you could take a 1 level dip into Fighter, a 1 level dip into Rogue, Cleric can always be useful, anything you like, but I'm just going to go to that 6th level of Barbarian here. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a new way to play. The spells that we've taken are spells, obviously, that are new from the mod, but also base level spells that most people probably wouldn't really give much of a second glance to. And doing so allows us to gain a lot of interesting effects, being able to stop people with Stinking Cloud in their tracks, getting acid and poison damage, grease for slipping them up, Melf's acid arrow, again, just more acid damage. There's a lot of different and interesting things you can do here, and with our wizard spellbook you have options for a lot of different spells that are all really fun to use in my opinion, as well as the fact that Transmutation Stone has a ton of effects, including giving you resistance to certain damage types and such like that. I can't use it here because I used it for the combat footage, but the one I did choose was the one that gave us constitution saving throw proficiency, but you can also gain resistances to certain damage types, as well as you know, I believe there's a movement speed one as well, which is also really good, and one that gives you dark vision, which can help with a human. So Transmutation Stone is pretty fun to have. You can create multiples of them per short rest as long as you cast a transmutation spell, which you obviously can do fairly easily with this build. Of course, you can see in my equipment section here that we have a ton of potions all lined up. Things like potions of supreme healing, smoke powder bombs, potions of flying, grease bottles, acid vials, alchemist fire, oil of combustion. There's a ton of different things here. So you get oils to coat your club, which we'll get into in a minute, and just it's so much fun. And obviously the big boy elixir of cloud giant strength to just make us absolutely broken in with our strength saving throws and all, and attack rolls and all that sort of thing, and damage, lots of damage. Overall, I think you've got a really fun and interesting playstyle here. You'll see from the combat footage kind of at the beginning and at the end of the video just how the unique kind of playstyle of this build comes into play, and it's just so fun in my opinion. Getting to play kind of two sides of a coin that wouldn't normally be paired together really, being Wizard and Barbarian, it just makes such a unique playstyle. I will say that this build definitely benefits from having another party member with you. Again, that Archer build is going to absolutely love you for making all of these special arrows that you can potentially make with alchemy, so I would definitely make sure you pick up stuff like that and kind of work together in that aspect. But anyways, let's get into the equipment, because there's a lot to talk about here. First up, our weapon, of course, is the Club of Hill Giant Strength. This is a basic club, and I wanted to use a club with this build because Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde both are known for using a cane, especially when Mr. Hyde used a cane to murder someone. So the cane is pretty iconic, so I knew I wanted to use a club, and the Club of Hill Giant Strength just does so much for this build. Even without the elixirs, we're going to have a base of 19 strength. That's effectively having an 18 for the ability score improvement, for the ability modifiers and such like that. So just having this around is amazing. Yes, it's only a 1d4 of base damage, but with the sheer amount of strength that we can have thanks to the elixirs as well, it's not really going to matter. Plus the damage improvements from Barbarian and other things like our spells, like if you cast like Green Flame Blade on this, you're getting a lot of extra damage out of that attack, and that triggers extra attack, and then you can throw things, and oh, it's too good. This is basically a requirement for the build as far as I'm concerned. Now, as for our armor, now here we have fashion options. If you really wanted the top hat look, which is kind of like iconic of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, then you do have the option of grabbing the Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant and combining that with the padded armor +2, because I think this is the closest thing that we're going to get looks-wise at least. There is some magic chaos happening in the background, but you know what, that's fitting for the build. The Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant is one of the very few top hat looking hats in the game. The other one is a a basic top hat that Chuckles wears that has no effect. Chuckles? Oh god. No, don't bring that clown back. What's the other clown? The clown that's in the game. Never mind. Basically, at the start of combat, the wearer will gain momentum equal to their charisma modifier. We don't have a charisma modifier really here, it's a +0, so that doesn't affect us. But we do gain advantage on concentration saving throws, so that can be really good for our wizard side of things. So this hat is very useful and does fit the look. And again, combining it with the padded armor +2, you take 2 less bludgeoning damage and you just get the look. I've coloured every piece of armour here in the P4 Gale die, so we basically get Gale's colours on this armour, so I think it looks quite nice altogether. However, this is just for looks. I think for the power building option, you're not really getting a lot out of this. So I would actually take off this using camp clothing, which I've used the Citizens Camp Clothing mod to give us suit coat B, and coloured it in the same dye, as well as the camp boots, in order to kind of give us a kind of, you know, fancy looking Gale, who I've also changed the hair and beard of to kind of just give him a bit of a different look. And I would swap the padded armor +2 with that for the Enraging Heart Garb to give us a +2 to Constitution, and whenever raging we generate Wrath. Unfortunately that part's bugged though, it doesn't work. Even in patch 7, still doesn't work. Definitely submitted bug reports on that one. But getting that +2 to Constitution, we're still going to have about the same AC, which is a 16, which kind of sucks, but we do have access to shield to help with that. And overall, having that greater Constitution is just going to give us more HP, which we absolutely love to have, and it's going to make our concentration saving throws better anyway. So I personally would prefer running this, and then you can kind of swap the hat out for whatever you like if you don't like the Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant. My early game option, the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, would be amazing for this build. Pretty much everything we do inflicts a condition of some kind, so Arcane Synergy will be up constantly, allowing our weapon attacks to deal additional damage equal to the affected entity's spell casting modifier. So I think that just works really, really nicely. You'll get way more damage out of your weapon attacks that way, which you absolutely want. In my testing, I used the Gibbous plus the padded armor, so technically the build was weaker overall in the testing, and it still performed really well, because I wanted to test kind of like what I considered the weakest version. And so, yeah, I mean, this build will absolutely shred no matter what. Next up for our cloak, we have the Derivation Cloak. Whenever you poison a foe, which we can do with things like Ray of Sickness and such, you regain a little bit of hit points. It's just a thematic flavor option. You can pick whatever you like here. Next up, the Gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of throwing, so this adds an extra 1d4 to throw attacks made, which, you know, it's more damage, perfect for us. And finally, Varsh Koku's Boots. This makes it so acidic surfaces that we're going to be creating with our various spells and acid vials not affect us at all, and we become resistant to acid damage. I think resistance to acid damage on a build like this just makes so much sense, and then combining this with the Transmuter Stone resistance, you can have 2 resistances right off the bat. Then when you rage, you have 5. So overall, we're a pretty tanky build. I mean, obviously acid damage doesn't come up a lot, but I still want to take it, so we're absolutely going to take these on this build. Next up, for our accessories, you have a couple of choices here. I've got the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation here to add extra damage to our acid and fire cantrips, equal to our spellcasting modifier. Basically Agonizing Blast for elemental cantrips. But you can also slap on the Broodmother's Revenge, so that whenever you're healed, your weapon gets coated with poison and deals an extra 1d6 poison damage. So you can get a bit of a healing damage combo going on there if you so desire. Next up for our ring, we have the Poisonous Ring, and that allows us to select up to 3 people or the same target 3 times and make them vulnerable to poison damage, meaning that they'll take double damage. The only way to avoid this is to either make the con save, which obviously a lot of creatures could do, as well as already being immune to poison damage, but this can seriously help with damage output if you want to lean into the poison side of things. And that can synergize with some other equipment that I'll be showing in a bit. But of course, we also have the Caustic Band, meaning that all of our weapon attacks also deal an extra 2 acid damage. Obviously, we just coat our weapon in a bit of our caustic brew and just keep smacking them for more damage. Obviously, this helps our low damage die of the club, basically turning that 1d4 into a 1d6 in a way. That kind of makes sense. So it's really, really nice. It just helps give us a bit of extra damage. But another option for a ring is, of course, the Ring of Flinging, which grants the wearer an extra 1d4 bonus to throw damage. I would say if you're not really too into the poison side of things, swap the Poisonous Ring out for this. Moving on to some alternative glove options, we have the Icarus Gloves. Whenever the wearer deals acid damage, which for us will be all the time, they also inflict noxious fumes upon the target. Noxious fumes makes it so hostile creatures within a radius around the affected creature take an additional 1d4 acid damage, so if you're dealing with a group, you can spread out the love a little bit. As well as we have the Poisonous Gloves. Whenever you deal poison damage, the target needs to succeed a con save or become poisoned, and as we already said, poisoned means that they suffer disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. So if you want to spread that condition a bit more readily, you absolutely can. And as you can see, looking at my very messy inventory, you just have a ton of utility here. Like I said, flying, invisibility, big ranged attacks with acid vials and alchemist fire, oil of bane, coat your weapon in oil and the target failing a charisma saving throw will become baned. Big healing potions, 30 to 60 healing. There's so many cool things here, like jumping, like jumping. You know, jumping. Why did I say it like that? There's just so many cool things you can make with alchemy. So go throughout the game, find those alchemical ingredients, make your brew, and let your dark side out every so often. It's, again, these Halloween builds aren't necessarily made to be the most optimal, you know, power builds or even, like, you know, exceptional roleplay builds. They're just here for a bit of fun. Like I say, this is the non-canon Halloween special episode of Baldur's Gate 3 where they all dress up and go out for Halloween and they have a little mini adventure, you know, like those early Saturday morning cartoons used to do. And this is just a fun build. I love the idea of turning Gale into Jekyll and Hyde. My original concept was to turn him into the Invisible Man, but then I forgot I already kind of did that in a better way with Dwegar. So turning him into Jekyll and Hyde was such a fun idea that I think honestly plays more into Gale's character than you even realize, and I cannot wait to see, for you guys to see what I have lined up for the future of these builds, especially now that mods are a thing. Oh, I'm so excited. So we're going to be doing the next few videos being these kind of origin Halloween builds. That's kind of going to be the kind of content library up until the end of October, and then we're going to get full into it because that's going to also give time for more mods to come out. Obviously, like I say, I already plan to mess with the Mystic mod. I'm looking at the Witch Artificer. I also am looking at the Blood Mage mod, but I took it out for this video because it was adding a bunch of spells to my spell list that were a bit confusing and overpowered, so I thought I might just leave them out for this video. And that is the basic problem with a lot of modded kind of classes and subclasses. They're just too strong. And any multi-class or interesting build that you could try to make would just be worse for just going like all the way in that class or subclass or whatever it is. So I don't know, I'm going to make sure that I vet a lot of mods. I might do a live stream soon just to kind of go over that. But anyways, yes, that is the build, and I'm super, super happy with this one, and I'm really looking forward to the other wacky shenanigans that I'll be showing you guys in the future. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and goodbye.